I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. Hey, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball. And again, of course, you're right here on Black Power Media. Please make sure you've gone to blackpowermedia.org and you've signed up there. Real quick, off the top, we are trying to hit our 175th patron. So if that's something you think you could do, we're still trying to hit that number. I think by this week, we're getting close. So please consider joining there as well. Of course, hit the join button below on the YouTube channel if you haven't already, and if that's something you can do as well. At least like, share, subscribe, invite your friends, invite your enemies, invite your colleagues, invite your whoever to come check this out. And as you saw at the beginning there, please also come back next week starting Tuesday at 8 a.m. Eastern again for another run of the new Remix Morning Show, which was a great and fun launch this past week. And we want to hurry up and quickly get to, of course, 5 days a week, and maybe even add another hour. That would be, at least some of us are pushing that. But so the more of you who are watching, liking, sharing, joining, subscribing, all of that, the better, the more that helps us continue to expand. New folks coming through next week, both as guests and hosts and potentially more. We just saw the launch of the Black Myths podcast last night, who just joined the channel. So shout out to them. A lot more also coming along those lines. And of course, later today, this being Dope Fridays, 5 p.m. Eastern, Lukman Nation, 7 p.m. Eastern, episode 12 of The Last Dope Intellectual, with Dr. Barbara Ransby as the special guest and some other new and revamped features and segments. You don't want to miss it. And then, of course, after that, we wrap up Friday night with Renegade Culture, and that crew coming back. Kamal, Kalanji, the Ear Doctor, Minister Server, and Jahai will be in the building at 9 o'clock. So you don't want to miss any of that. Now, I also just want to say very quickly, the myth and propaganda of Black buying power is fastly approaching 70,000 digital downloads. So if you haven't gotten your copy, or if your friends haven't gotten their copy, it would be great to see that number get hit. And of course, I know it's free. I know it's downloaded by chapter, but that still suggests some strong interest in the work, and roughly, I don't know, roughly 10,000+ copies downloaded of the entire book. And that doesn't actually count the downloads of the entire book. No, it does of the entire book, but it doesn't count the purchases of the hard copy. So really appreciate everybody continuing to support that work, and trying to help, puncture one of many, many myths that we have to deal with. I also want to say, before we get to our special guest, I don't know if any of you can see this in the back. There is a new print on the wall, just picked up this morning, sent several weeks ago by the dear good brother, Dr. Keith Montgomery, Professor Keith Montgomery. Much appreciation to you. I'll send you another particular, private thank you later on, but we just got it. I wanted to, we're trying to get some of the white off the wall. And that may be a metaphor too. Trying to get some white off the wall in the background here, and I really appreciate that gift. Anyway, so shout out to him, and anyone else want to support the program that way too. We're happy to get some artwork. That's not my forte. Clothing and art is not my strong suit, so any help I can get there, we appreciate it. But and maybe later on, I'll move the camera around so we can get a better look of it. Didn't think to do that before, but anyway, but I really appreciate this. It's a beautiful piece of work, and actually I will shout them out. I don't mind doing that. From I want to say somewhere in no, this is California. Oh no, it's wait, is this saying Louisiana and California? This is a strange looking address. Anyway, you all can figure it out. Sika, Master Jeweler, African Clothes and Art is where the thing came from. I hope that shows up. Everybody should check them out, and we appreciate that anyway. So look, I'm very excited to get to our, let me turn now to our guests here and get to the show. I'm very excited to speak with them. And I want to say before, actually I'll say this, I want to say this in her presence. So let me just bring up our guests here. authors of this new book, Generation Mixed Goes to School. You've heard me talking about it up here, Radically Listening to Multiracial Kids, co-authored by Dr. Ralina Joseph, who is presidential term professor of communication, director of the Center of Communication, Difference and Equity, and associate dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Washington in Seattle, and Allison Brisco-Smith, who is a clinical psychologist and director of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the Wright Institute. Welcome to the both of you. Good morning, and thanks for joining us here at I Mix What I Like. It's good to see you again, Professor Joseph. Good to meet you, Professor Allison Brisco-Smith. Congratulations on the work. Good morning.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having us.
So, Dr. Joseph, I wanted to say before you got up here, I wanted to just tell everybody once again, I mentioned it on another program before today, but I really appreciate, it's really through your work that I was introduced really belatedly to the whole field of critical mixed race studies. I know, well, one of your early articles and essays continues to this day be one of my favorite in terms of, anyway, of saying so much about the field of mixed race studies and how it's studied and approached, and all the some of the controversies that I didn't even know about. So anyway, I really want to just thank you publicly for all of that and your previous interviews and your work. So thank you very much. And Professor Brisco-Smith, I look forward to learning more because what you all did here is fantastic and very interesting. So anyway, I just wanted to say that much before we got started. And thank you again.
Thank you. And as soon as this came out, we knew that we wanted to come and talk to you about it.
Fair enough. I love it. And I'm glad you did. I think we might struggle. I don't know. I love that you came on together, but I mean, we might struggle with a little echo because you don't have headphones on, but yeah. we'll do what it do, as they say. Listen, you all, I want to invite you, of course, to take us anywhere. I don't initially invite us to go, to make sure that you get out in this discussion what you all intend to get out. But selfishly, I really did want to start with something that you all write literally on page 1, which, if I understood correctly, is a much better way of saying what I've been arguing for the better part of my entire life, which is that the mythology that we who are supposedly mixed are confused is really not the issue. There's something else going on. I'm not confused. I don't think I've really ever been confused about race. And Professor Joseph, as I said to you before, I've said that, and I really do still continue to believe this, that nobody understands white people or white supremacy better than Black Americans, and nobody within that group better than those of us with a white parent. Mm-hmm. So when you all wrote at the end of your first paragraph on page 1, referring to complications of student identity and how people are being identified, you say these complications come about not because of an intrinsic sense of confusion inside of multiracial kids. Rather, mixed race kids, or to use the nomenclature of this book's title, Generation Mixed Kids, experience a monoracial or single race world that is confused about mixed race. Could you just elaborate on that and maybe start there to talk about what your book is really doing here and what that statement says about the work that is done in this book?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe to answer that question, we can also talk about how we came to the book.
Of course.
So I mean, and you'll see that chapter, as all of them, start with the words of kids. And we come to that understanding. We come to it instinctively, right? But we also really tried to ground everything in this book with the words of kids, of K-12 kids who really lead us forward in this way of understanding race and mixed race. And Allison and I have, first off, we haven't seen each other in
more than a year and a half.
And Allison just flew up from Oakland last night. We're here in Seattle, so this is very exciting for us.
I love it. I love that we can help facilitate or play a role in the reunion.
Yes. It was perfect timing. But we've been friends for 20 years. We are godmothers to each other's godchildren, and our husbands are also godfathers to each other's children, and so we're family. And we have talked about issues of race and mixed race with ourselves. Myself as being mixed race, and
myself as being Black and seen as mixed, and multiracial in the multi-generational ways that we do.
Did we lose Jared?
No, did you lose me? I'm still seeing you and hearing you.
Okay. We saw.
What happened? I didn't go anywhere. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay. Everything seems fine over here.
Okay, good. And so, we had this opportunity to write this book and really bring our conversations about ourselves, about our relationships, about our children into an academic space, and to bring that field of critical mixed race studies to psychology. And Allison brought in a whole area, a whole discipline that I didn't know about, that really enlivened the work that I've done and how I've been able to understand race. And again, these things that I think that fundamentally were like, yes, of course it makes sense that it's the world that's messed up, it's not the kids, but to have the science of psychology that's able to then back that up, I think is part of the specialness that we're able to bring to the book.
Right on. So, but again, to this question of who is confused is really what I have in my notes here, because this idea that, I mean, even in seeing some of the work that you referenced that I was familiar with, the Janet Helms and the cross work and all of that work, was a reminder for me again. It can't just be that we who are so-called mixed are alone in confusion. Otherwise, all these other groups wouldn't be talking about negrescence models and become, anyway. So this point of the monoracial world that is confused about mixed race, which I then think projects itself onto us to say that is those who are mixed, to say that you all are confused. Anyways, I'd like, just please say a little more about that. Yeah.
So, I mean, I come to this in terms of both, as Ralina was mentioning, but also in terms of actually a critique of the field of psychology. The field of psychology has been used to reinforce this notion of confusion, reinforce this notion of pathology. That's what clinical psychology has done for a long time. Those poor, confused folks, they have to be struggling. So what we were able to do in kind of combining is to take, number one, what kids actually say, number two, our lived experiences, and then critical mixed race theory to critique that and to say, nope, that's not really what's happening. When we actually listen to kids and listening kids in dialogue with each other, that's also the other thing. We had siblings talk to each other. We were witnessing, kids within families talk to each other. And so that meant that they had, a kinship to this experience, a window into this experience that doesn't happen necessarily when even I interview somebody, so it's about and they allowed us to really listen to that. So as we listened to that and had to keep on going further and further to really hear them, that sentiment came out again and again. And it's not to say that it doesn't feel bad to be impacted by a monoracial society. It does feel bad. And so that's also why I bring in this kind of piece around implicit bias. We wanted to really, focus on the agency that these kids have, and also lay out the multiple sources outside of themselves that are impacting them. There's a quote that stands out so much to me, which is a girl said, "It's not that I don't know who I am, it's that the world won't let me be."
Oh my God. Hold up. Wait a minute. I promise you it's right there. I know you can't see it, but that's my next. Wait a minute. That's the next question. 2 questions away. That exact line. The world won't let me be. I read that. I'm not used to seeing myself in media, which is something we're going to come to. I'm not used to reading about my own personal experience specifically, but that line, and also the one where you also talk about, as I have in my own smaller excursions into this work, is that initial question of what are you? And the license people think that they have to approach me to ask, like and it feels like they need to know. Like they're asking because they need to know. Like, what are you doing to me when you walk into the room? I need to find out what exactly are you then. And it becomes anyway, but they won't let me be. That was heavy. I love that one. Yeah, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you off. Please keep going.
No, that's what we hope for.
Yeah.
That's exactly the point, that you would see yourself in the page, and that what we were really trying to work for is that the kids would see themselves.
That's right.
And this piece too around the internal sense of self, and as if multiracial folks are doing something to somebody else. You've bothered me because I can't understand you. You've made me uncomfortable because of what you maybe represent. And I just was doing a talk recently I work in schools. And so we were talking a little bit about this. And so one of the questions was, okay, so I know that I'm not supposed to ask people what they are. What if I just ask my kid to ask the other kids, so how does so-and-so identify? And then we had to kind of pause a little bit. And I said, well, what if you never find out? What if you could just not find out? Like that presumption of a need to know and to categorize, I understand is fundamentally psychological in some ways. I'm going to me, not me, group, my group. I understand that, and we present the kind of psychology around that. And we're a little bit smarter than that. Like we could pump our brakes just a little bit and like, what if I don't know? Or rather, what if I just listen to how the person tells me who they are? But this desire to categorize and to place and to put within a hierarchy is a problem.
Yeah. And I think that what we see fundamentally is that it shakes up other people's conception of themselves. And that's why we make them so uncomfortable. Because it's like, if I can't read you, how do I know who I am? Right? And to place that all on the body of a 5-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 9-year-old, right? And these are their fundamental first experiences in school, not just the questioning that happens as we hear from classmates, but from teachers, from other members of the school community. It's a lot. It's a lot.
I just want to say one other thing around that, because one of the comments that we got back from that was, oh, okay, so it just shouldn't matter. It's raceless then is what you're saying. And that's what the person, oh, you're just saying I should just be, I'm like, nope, well, hold up. What we're saying is, how about we listen to what kids are telling us about what is important about their identities, knowing that they are children, knowing that it will change, knowing that they are impacted by racism too. So it's not this kind of flip of, and I think we've heard you kind of talk about this as well, not some sort of flip of, multiraciality is post-raciality. Look how they've transcended. We're not saying that. We're saying, can you just listen a little bit?
Yeah.
No, in fact, it's something in Ralina, and something you had written years ago that I used to quote all the time, where you quoted, I think it was Homie Baba's statement on, it's not that so-called we who are so-called mixed are the proof of some non-raciality or post-raciality. No, it's that we are the result. I forgot how he put it. It was beautiful. You quote, but it was we're the result of some sort of hostile conflict. Like again, that's why whenever anyway, there's so many times where I feel like we maybe come back to that where people who are positioned prominently in public spaces who are so-called mixed try to make that point. When in reality, I'm saying, no, if you were more honest with yourself, you would realize a more critical response to all of this. You have to have had a more critical response to all this growing up. Anyway, so I man, there's so many things. Now I want to go a little out of order, if you don't mind, because for instance, well, Allison, when you say the whole thing of being black and red is mixed, as part of it. So where I started, I mentioned where I saw a little of myself in here. I also saw elements in here where I didn't see myself, where I was more comfortable and more used to not seeing my experience. For instance, somewhat autobiographically, some of it is because in the earlier part of my life, I looked differently. I read more as black. I had my hair, I was a little darker. I think it has also to do with the time we were in, where multiracial wasn't considered. You were either one or the other. So they just saw, they saw the afro, the little brown skin. Okay, that's it. He's that. But then later, so in other words, I'm bringing that up because there are times where people who you all interview are talking about being read differently, almost from moment to moment, setting to setting, with people, including if they're sitting with their siblings or with their friends, that changes, or the identity of those doing the judging changes who they are identified as. And then there is also this issue that you raised that I didn't want to come back to, because you talk about the centrality of Blackness in all of this.
Yes.
So again, where I did not see myself is where others would say I am Black, Indian, and white, or I sometimes would say I'm Black and white. I never understood that as an option. White was never an option. Like, white doesn't accept any sort of the one dropness in this country doesn't accept any of the Blackness. So and I would even have Black people who were lighter skinned at one point in my life say, I'm mad at you for looking blacker than I do. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. I've said a whole bunch. I don't even have a question at the end of that. There was just something in there, and I don't want to keep talking, but I just wanted to lay all of that out and invite you all to talk about what I'm saying as you all talked about it in your book. Maybe would be a way to do it. Because anyway, but it was just fast. Anyway, I'm just.
Well, I mean, I think that what you're talking about in terms of over the course of people's lifetime, this shifts. Geographically, this shifts. So we're also talking about, our research was conducted here in Seattle. That's a very multiracial city. And so for a child to be able to say, I'm Black, Indian, and white, that means something to their classmates where they can register and be like, okay, I get that. I understand what that means, in a way in which if they were in Topeka, right, that might not be an option. And so I think that there's something important that we're doing here about the way in which race is, people construct their racialization happens according to who is around you. And so we talk about like the choices of neighborhoods and where to live, right? Where do families choose to put their children in school? Who do you also choose to surround your kids with in terms of your caregivers, in terms of the people who have authority in their lives, their doctors, their dentists? All of these different ways are going to reflect how we choose and see racialization, including in terms of mixed race, right? But certainly we see the effect of these are generation mixed, post mark one or more kids, and it's also in an incredibly multiracial city where this makes sense. And even the child that you talked about who identified as Black, Indian, and white, because we continue to be in touch with many of these kids, her identification is as Black right now. So I think that it's important to see, like, we're touching one specific spot, one specific moment. All these moments change throughout the course of an individual's lifetime, not just a child's lifetime, an individual's lifetime.
I don't know, Allison, if you wanted to add anything, because I've rambled a lot, so please go ahead.
Well, it's good to be in dialogue and conversation and to see how this is really landing. The piece that you raised, which is also a central piece that we want to raise, is the role of anti-blackness, right? And that it's present. So the other piece that we want to, offer and extend a little bit of grace to kids to is that children are negotiating anti-blackness too.
Yes.
So to hold on, and I hold and I share and I understand where the concern is when we see a little kid who is multiracial, who actually clings to whiteness. Mm-hmm. But we have to understand, well, why would that happen? I mean, have we looked outside? Have we seen what is available? So if, as grown folks are clinging to their proximity to whiteness, why would we shouldn't be surprised that may be a step in development for kids too. I'll tell a super quick story, super quick. Years ago, my family lives in Oakland. We were going to a kid focused Black Lives Matter rally at the Lake Merritt. If anyone knows Lake Merritt, you know how it pops off. So we went to Lake Merritt, right? So my son, who identifies as Black and is Black, white, and Mexican, he's like, well, why are we going to this thing? And I'm like, we're going because people haven't been treating Black folks well. And he goes, but I'm Black. So he starts, doing some mental calculation, right? We're talking about this, he's seeing this. And then he says, but it's okay because I'm white too. So he was trying to find a way of safety in that kind of moment. And, I didn't take it from him in that instant, right? As we're kind of negotiating. But later we did have the question like, yes, and How are you seen? How are you impacted? Let's think about this. And his identity has shifted and changed over time, right? But in that particular moment, the salience of what was happening was that his Blackness was a risk. So we see that, we understand, like, I'm fully grown and that's hard to negotiate. And he was 6. So let's give our kids some space around that. And we can also, depending on who we are and what we want, and not to reify anti-blackness, can hold them in that. But it makes sense. And we heard these kids talk about that. They know the game. They know what whiteness will for them. We had a kid who talked about, if I really just want to focus more on sports and focus more on that, I'm going to lean a little bit more into my white identity. But when I go to the robotics club, I'm going to lean into my Asian identity. Like, the agency that they have to understand and negotiate. And I think, as you kind of said, to really know and articulate the ways that whiteness works, those kids have access to and are impacted by.
And to add on to that, and that's a privilege for kids that are lighter skinned and are racially ambiguous. And so we also spend some time in the book talking about kids who are read exclusively as Black and are experiencing implicit bias, and what that means for them in their school classrooms, right? And what it means for them is, it means exclusion, it means racism and how it's experienced in lots of different ways. It means, in the case of one little boy who was 10 years old at the time, and a small 10-year-old, that a white female teacher was so afraid of this child after he got detention, he acted up in class, that she couldn't tell him that he had detention, had to go and find a Black male teacher to tell him that he had detention, right? Who has a white mother, but is read exclusively as Black. So I think that we saw also the difference, very much so, between the children who were part Black and their experiences, and the other kids in our study who were mixed with other things, and those who were able to pass as white or were read in racially, were not read as not Black, quite frankly.
Yeah, and that's Professor Joseph, going back, let me just mute you guys while I get this out, because the echo is coming in pretty strong. So I just want to make sure this is something I got from your work years ago, that there is this particular need to look at, as I remember you putting it, something like mixed race African American experiences, as opposed to, we're just, in other words, that experience is not the same as Asian and white, even Latino and white, all these other mixed. So there isn't a sort of mono or a universal multiracial experience. I mean, there are differences here. And that last story you told did resonate with me, that the teachers, which you point out to, which I wanted to ask you about, was an important point here, because something like over 80% of teachers are still white women. And this was something that I remember in my own experience. Again, my joke used to be, it didn't matter how mixed or light I would be. In the moments of their anger, I could have been the darkest, biggest, scariest, because that seemed to be exactly how I got treated. Anyway, so I thought but that issue of the teachers is still, I was a little bit surprised to see the numbers were still that high in terms of white women being teachers, and this still having, forget my phrase, and you change, correct it, but a tremendous and even negative impact here. It's like a problem. So is there anything else you would want to say about these differences in so-called mixed race experiences that and I'm forgetting, I can't remember if I'm getting this from your work or the Pew research that I know, some of which you all referenced, but from what I remember, it seemed that even where there was a slight uptick in interracial dating, Black women were the least involved in that, and that Black people collectively were not really involving that much more with the Black-white intermingling was not increasing. Maybe Black Latino, Black Indian, Black something else. So is there something that you take away from that realization or those numbers in your work here?
Yeah, Black women and Asian men are the least likely to be in interracial relationships. I mean, I think it shows, kind of who in the power structure is the most and the least desirable, right? And the imagined to be the furthest away from whiteness in lots of different ways. And in terms of the kind of the nomenclature and trying to do mixed race African American, what we try and do, and you might have noticed this, is that we try to use the terminology that the kids are using. Mm-hmm. So we prompt them in certain ways, we have them fill stuff out in surveys, but we also really listen to whatever they said in their dialogues, and that's how we use it. And we're very clear to say this is how they identify at school. Because we also don't know, when they're on the basketball court, when they're at the playground, when they're at church, when they're in all these other settings, when they're at grandma's house, how they might identify. But we try and do that very carefully. And I think that again, we're catching a snippet. And I know that on other days, if we were to follow these kids, even within that same school year, we might catch a different identification. But I think that having not just, we have very few kids that just wanted that identification of multiracial, period. And I think this is where, since check one or more, this is a big thing for me, that it's not, most of us do not have a purely deracialized multiracial identification. And so when you see, for example, in the Chauvin trial, if you notice, there were 2 or 3 jurors that were described as multiracial. I was like, what does that mean? Right, so you're telling me that someone who is Japanese American and white is going to have the same type of experience as someone who is Samoan and black, right? We know those are fundamentally different, and yet those 2 individuals could both be described as multiracial here. So I think that we need to really work to get away from that classification and as without other descriptors, right? Our data is smarter. We're able to have a much finer grain on things. And yet reporting out from schools, reporting out from things like, the juror selection, we don't get that sense. And that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to show that complexity of identification, mixed and that we don't always see.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And also, I pointed out the other day, Dante Wright's mother is white. Mm-hmm. And I just leave it at there when people want to ask questions about race in this country or whatever, and the police especially, but it also made me think in terms of Dante Wright's and your killing and your book, that what role does class play in all of this? That if you are, as is just sometimes, it's just simply put, if you are mixed and living within a poor Black community, your self-identity and the identity imposed on you is going to be different than if you are so-called mixed and living in an affluent white community and going wherever that, or somewhere in between. So did that particular variable show up in your work, or how did it show up in your work?
I think it showed up a lot, and I'll speak as a person that's not from this area, but we heard so much about people talking about things that are basically coded as, socioeconomic and status, about like, well, where could they go to school? Where could we even go to school? What neighborhood could we possibly go? I remember a mom in particular talking about like, well, we couldn't, we wanted to find a neighborhood where we had to negotiate between safety and safety. Safety in terms of I am seen, I am held, I know I belong, and safety, but I don't feel that way. So those pieces came up. I don't think they were spoken about as class, but they are class, and there are the ways in which race and class get conflated, and the ways in which race and class and oppression get operated. But we heard families struggle with that all the time. And I think, there's another piece that really emerges too. We've been talking about the outside, and the perceptions. One of the things that we have to pause is sometimes the outside is the parent. Mm-hmm. And about the ways in which the parents have hoped that this multiraciality would protect them. Yeah. Had hoped that, there's one story that we talk about a lot where a mom kind of talks about, well, a child, a multiracial family, a white woman and a Black man and their child identifies as Black. And the mom pushed, Black, really? Really? And he's like, yeah, Black. And then she says, well, not Black like her, pointing to me. Right? So wow. This need, right? And I want to, hold that with as much kind of like grace as possible, which is this is around parents caring for their children, and also hold that meant it was really hard for her. And not only her, we saw this a lot. It was really hard for parents to hold on to when their children identified in ways that they found, let's just be frank about it, risky. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm sorry. Were you about to go on to something else? Because this is all in my notes here. Like,
I was reading your notes. I was right there with you.
I know that's what I'm saying right here. Because again, Ralina, again, you were more than anybody primarily responsible for me being even made aware of this some years ago, and trying to learn more about this, and I wanted to ask you about. So to be clear, when you all are talking about the check one or more, you're talking about, you interviewed people, youngsters who were born after the 2000 census. That's your line there. Where there was more options for checking all of these boxes. When I was growing up, it was black, white, or other.
Yeah.
And I refused to put white, and I was not going to be an other. So that's how I just always, and I remember even my white mother said that at one point, you're not an other. And she didn't say it this way, but you can't be white is really what she was trying to say, because at least back then that was not an option. Anyway, but this role of white women in pushing this multiracial thing to hold on to their children. So it's like white women are saying in these instances, if I may paraphrase, we want this black man, but him only. And we don't want the whole community, and we won't want our offspring to be in that community necessarily, or to have to suffer the weight that that community suffers. So we want to, don't you want to maybe be biracial, multiracial, anyway. So what, for lack of a better way of putting it, what role have white women played in this expansion of a category since 2000 or even before then?
Well, we know that they're responsible for the creation of the category, right? They were the ones, and one particular woman whose name I won't say because I've gotten in trouble in the past, but was really responsible for doing the major lobbying through organization Project Race, Reclassify All Children Equally, that got the check one or more category passed. The wonderful work of political scientist Kim Williams, who's at Portland State, she traces this in her book. And what they wanted at first was a multiracial category. There was a pushback from a number of racial advocacy organizations, and so that didn't happen. So we had this check one or more category as a result. But it was white women in this multiracial movement. It was not multiracial adults, right? It was not those of us from the.
And that's what your book is clear on. I'm sorry to cut you up, but that's what your book is like. Even we mixed kids don't want that. It doesn't work because it doesn't work. But anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off again. Sorry about that.
No, absolutely. So yeah, it was interesting. And also we want to be clear, this is not all white mothers. We want to be clear, it's not all white mothers. So for example, the mother of the little boy that I was talking about, who was treated so unfairly by his teacher, and the teacher couldn't even tell him he had detention. That mother, we also describe her doing her own Black history curriculum for her children, right? She is going and doing all kinds of additional work for the kids all the time around their Blackness. We had other white mothers that were also really trying to have their kids engage deeply in conversations around race and racialization, right? And we also had white mothers who, and I think that Allison is in general a much better person than I am, but she also she's able to, I think, as a clinical psychologist, tap into, what are the feelings and the emotions here, the desire for safety. We all want our kids to be safe, but for white people, they're like, well, they can be safe because they can be like me, right? And that's fundamentally where it's coming from. But the case of this white mother, part of the reason that particular dialogue was so difficult is that white mother, actually, the child keeps pushing back, no, I'm Black, and ends up crying. And in that space, she watches him cry and still is not kind of making the connection. He's crying because you are refusing to see him as his identity. And this is a brown-skinned boy. This is a brown-skinned boy.
Did you see the Rachel Dolezal documentary by any chance? I think it was on Netflix.
I saw some of it because my grad students wrote on it. So I was like, let me watch enough that I can give you feedback.
She was doing that to her son.
Really?
She was doing that to her son, and you could see it in his face. And at one point, he's on camera, and he just says, "All this would go away if she would just stop. You know, if she would just stop this performance."
Wow.
And I was just crushed by that. I was just sitting there like, "Dag, woman, like, come on now." So I get your point that it's not all white women, and look, some of us had parents, you know, white mothers who overcompensated the other way, quite frankly. So and pushed the other, you know. So I'm not. And I'm also not inviting commentary on my mothers. I'm just saying, you know, just a general, but I think it's important to point out, like, you know, how that category got to be where it is and why, I think is very important. Speaking of commentary, those in the comments and chats, I see the number is pretty big. I'm intentionally not looking at it so I don't get distracted and go down rabbit holes while we have guests on. But I only have, 2 really more questions, and then to the extent that they have time, I will go to the comments and get some questions and all of that. One of them is just about the methodology that was originally at the very top of my list, and I'll even show you there again to ask, but it got pushed down because of so many other things. Because you talk about this concept of radical listening, so I did want you to talk a little bit about what that means and how it, you know, functioned in this work.
Sure. So, I mean, what we think about in terms of radical listening is it's, you know, I want to make it sound approachable. Sometimes we put a thing on top of listening, like, what is that magical thing? But the piece with radical listening is really honestly to slow down and to listen for power and where power is. And actually that our listening is about interrupting that power and interrupting the oppression that sometimes happens. And so I think about this as a clinical psychologist. My whole job is to listen. And by the way, I want to say it takes a long time to be trained how to listen and how to listen with particular ears, right? So it can be, and a lot of, you know, what happened with this parent is that she was not able to listen to her child because her fear got in her way, right? So what we're actually encouraging folks to do is to slow down, right? And not so much about listen for what I want to say back, listen for how this makes me feel, but what is that child saying? What are they communicating? And not only with what they're kind of, you know, talking to us, but how are they moving through the world? Are you noticing who they spend their time with? Are you noticing? We hear this all the time in the book. Kids actually come in to realize that, well, it turns out everybody I spend time with is just like me. And the people I feel best with are people that are just like me, that have, you know, a sense of blackness or sense of identity in a particular way. So that's a long way of kind of saying radical listening is about that. And then in terms of the methodology, what we decided to do is to listen to kids be in dialogue with each other and to talk to each other. So we were there as interviewers in the room. We gave them a couple questions, but the idea is we wanted them as families. You know, for the little ones, we had their parents there. For the older ones, we had them siblings kind of talk to each other. And then frankly, in that listening, we had to listen to it and scrap the entire book. We had an outline and a plan and how we were going to do things and listened. And then it turned out that's not what the kids told us. That our beautiful plan of like, we're going to have solutions and then we're going to have problems. That's not what they offered. And that's not what they wanted us to do. So we had to try to do that and also do things like listen to the literature. So what was psychology saying? And where's the power analysis? Oh, the power analysis is that was very, very few multiracial folks actually generating that research. So we actually focused in on those people. We focused in on Sarah Gaither. We focused in on Rockamore. We focused in on the people that had those lived experiences and try to lift those up. You can tell I get excited about radical listening. But so that's what I think it is and how I think we employed it.
Right on. Ralina, did you want to add to any of that before?
No, I mean, yeah, I think that the main thing, I mean, just in terms of the example, the mom that we're giving the example of with the little boy, she wasn't listening radically to her kid, because there's a piece of the radical listening is you hold someone else's experience, and if it's uncomfortable, you deal with that. You deal with that discomfort. We talk about this experience of friction, the heat that's arising in your body as you are feeling that discomfort, and other scholars talk about you sit in the fire. And that's what we're asking parents to do here. That's what we're asking educators to do, to sit in that fire, even if their experience is different from yours, even if their experience is dissonant. You don't want your child to identify as Black, but he does identify as Black. Hear it, listen. And it's a skill that so many folks are not doing, and particularly, the power is often the parent is on top of the child, and we're asking actually to flip that. How do we flip that, and how do we really hear from our kids?
Well, for my last question, I was guilty of certainly not radically listening or radically reading, because as I emailed you all right away, at the beginning when you made reference to to Mixed-ish show, sort of making a revolutionary break in terms of the presentation or the prevalence of multiraciality in pop culture. That's where I was first saying that's where I don't see myself, because I had to admit I hadn't read farther into the book yet. I still have not seen beyond that episode 1 of that show. So I had a very strong, hostile, visceral reaction to the pilot, which I have to admit had as much to do with the pro-Reaganite white father figure in there, which I hated, because just in my household, Reagan will always be the devil, growing up, will always be. And I thought that was such an unnecessary additional character added to weight the show in a different direction. But as you pointed out to me, I had you said keep reading, and your point was, well, I'll let you make your point, but part of your point was at least that politely saying I hadn't radically listened or read yet, but also that the young people you interviewed had a very particular and maybe even different reaction to that show than I was thinking you were intending or meaning to say. So talk a little bit about the show Mixed-ish, if you would, and what it is or isn't doing in relationship to your work and what your respondents were saying.
Yeah, I mean, we're just, I think, citing it there as a hook to talk about the prevalence of multiracial representations at this moment. As a child, right, I clung to representations of Lisa Bonet, right. And I had a stack of magazines of girls who I identified from Sassy Magazine who looked mixed. And that was kind of me just doing this reading process, right? It was my first kind of foray into being a scholar. And kids today, their first president was Barack Obama, right? And so understanding him as Black and mixed, right? Black with a white mother. And just being able to turn on ABC, not niche television, not something that's streaming, not even on Hulu, right? Prime time, bread and butter TV, and to see a multiracial family, that felt for us, that is very different. So I think that was our, and we kind of paired up with, and that's on in the same way in which that same network has Blackish, it had Fresh Off the Boat. Modern Family is trying to show this is a diversity in a sitcom-y, fairly standardized way, but still the fact that we have a diversity of representations is really different for these kids than what we were able to experience. And that's not to say that it's a representation that might reflect at least yours and my experience. And I kind of go in and I say, it's problematic in these particular ways. I actually think season 2 is a lot better, and they focus a lot more on the mom's experience and about her experience as a Black woman in a white workplace and with her sister. So it's really interesting what they're doing. I'm wondering if they mix up the writing staff actually. But season 1 is every single episode is about Bo's struggle between, am I Black, am I white, and then at the end of the episode, I'm actually mixed. And it goes through that, right, until the kind of the end of the season where there's some kind of some type of a resolution, and then they kind of got that out of their system, I think, and now it feels more of a way to explore race in a little more complicated way. So you might pick it up season 2, Jared.
Well, I'm gonna watch the whole thing just to for edification purposes or whatever. But it seemed to me to be doing what my general criticism is of all the prevalence and projection of more multiraciality in pop culture, which is to do what those white mothers were attempting to do. Drag everything out of its Blackness, drag everything away from, anti-Black policy, behavior, whatever, and to turn it. So when the kids in that first episode were talking, it was presented as if a raceless, group. And I'm saying, first of all, this is late 70s, early 80s, because of Reagan. I'm saying this 80s. I was like, there's no way they're having this raceless. I was just like, I can't. I mean, and then I dove into my own anecdotal stuff in it, which is unscientific and not, maybe appropriate, but it was just like, how could this be? And that's why I turned it off. So anyway, I appreciate your response to me and what you said in the book about it and all of that. And Allison, did you want to say anything about that?
I think I'm gonna be a little like psychologist-y about it. I think it's actually super important in the reaction that you have, because the truth of the matter is, as you're talking about, if you don't ever see yourself fully represented, and when you get pitched this kind of idea, you're like, oh, here we go again, right? And that's actually what we wanted to lean in and try to do differently, is like, we didn't want to have it, and here we go again. And I think in some ways, we got sucked into that kind of before, but when you actually listen to the kids, but that's also the kind of piece. It's also, and Ralina can say this much better, when you only have one thing to represent you, and it has to bear the weight of everybody's experiences, that's also the problem there, because it's not everybody's experiences. But then when you go the other way and just place, I'm getting a chance to consult with some media companies now, and so everybody loves putting up multiracial families, but never saying anything about it. So then you've got this erasure of like, it can be done, but that it's actually not what my family looks like, and it's not the place that we actually talk about it. So it's like this multiraciality that is actually silenced. So I'm hopeful that people are going to be able to have more representations so that we could actually see ourselves in those moments. Or
so to me, that's where I don't want that in this context. What media are meant to do in this society, so I even created this whole for fun, really, the Vernon philosophy of Black media avoidance is my point. And really, it's just meant to say that in this context, none of us should be looking for ourselves in any of this media. That's the trick, because what they're doing is presenting a version that they want us to have of ourselves, and our desire for that causes more political and other confusion in the real world. So like I haven't studied this, so I don't know, but it seems to me that they invert the projection is an inversion of what happens in reality. So for instance, we see way more white men with Black women on TV than it happens in real life. And I'm saying, so why are you doing that? That is a complete. So there's a political reason for that. There's something that there is attempting to being done here that I think is starting with anti-blackness and meant to cause more confusion, meant to disrupt and disunify the one dropness and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's where I start to get, like I want to see my story, but then I don't, because I think it's anyway, but
well, I hear that.
Let me let you respond and give me a time check so I can start looking, what your time is like, so I can start getting some comments and questions.
I hear that as you and all of us, frankly, not having trust in how multiraciality is used. Yeah. Right.
That's right.
We hear the kids talk about, my multiraciality is an irritant to everybody else, but it's great for TV. Right? It's great to sell a product. It's great when you go into Target. It's great when you've got the images up, right? So I actually, again, places of our own difference, I think, are really important. And also, I hear you expressing, like, you don't trust what media is going to do with multiraciality, because we don't have a lot of track record around it, that it has been used in this way to be like, see, everything's all good. So, and the place that I'll hold on to is, like, I do know that it's important, like, search and do the sassy to find yourself there, right? Or I'm originally from Hawaii, and I just had an opportunity to talk to the 5 Black kids at the largest independent school in the nation in Hawaii. And that was radical, right? Wow. Because when I was there, I was the one Black kid out of 1,600 kids, right? And that was tough, and not because it was privileged, blah, blah, blah. But what they did when they found each other and to see each other, it was actually something that moves towards healing and valuing Blackness, and supported them in that. So I think these are great places for a difference in dialogue for us to kind of articulate these challenges. I think that's the important piece, and for people to hear this.
Absolutely. And to think that we as adults are engaging differently than kids. So we can think about all of the wide array of other engagements that we have, of real life representations, but kids might be, and particularly that kid in Topeka, might be looking at the Target ad. right? Or might be looking at that one representation. And so we also have to demand better of our media. And we have to demand that they are actually talking about race, and that they're having, if they have the conscious choice to have a Black man and a white woman, that there is some discussion around that and what race means at this moment. Right.
But how would you do that in a Cheerios commercial? So that, like, how does that work? How would they even do that? Like, I mean, that's why I keep coming down on this, on the thing of my fantasies, I would rather there be greater political education and extra institutional organizing around this work to say, we don't want to see ourselves. We shouldn't expect to see ourselves properly there. And we should prepare ourselves to have conversations elsewhere to deal with the messaging we're getting, so that when we do see because I get it. I mean, we all, like, I joke all the time that I want Vin Diesel and The Rock to keep making movies to keep me relevant. You know what I mean? Like, I joke like all that, but at this, I mean, and some of it is real. I get it. Some of it, you want to see the guy, the hero, look like you might look if you look in the mirror and maybe got in shape or whatever. But at the same time, I'm saying, no, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to present a version of myself that would be acceptable of so many other horrible things going on, and that's where I'm. Anyway, but my point would be, how would they do that in the Cheerios commercial where they have this? I mean, anyway, I don't know.
I mean,
that's
I think
even a real question. But
there are ways. There are ways to have race, to have gender, to have sexuality connected in meaningful moments, even in advertisements, right? In ways that don't just feel like throwaways. And part of it is, and we were listening to your to the interview that you sent to us. I think that part of it is that every couple that you see is probably not interracial. Right. That we see, because I think that's part of what you were bonking at, right? That if I see every and we're picking on Target right here. If we see every couple that's in a Target ad that's interracial, what does that do to our understanding of monoracial couples and monoracial families, right? But there's a story that every ad is telling that's beyond the kind of there's the A story and the B story, where there's another narrative that's happening there. And I think there are really sophisticated ways to tie in race, to tie in meaning, and also ways that we know that there's all kinds of representations that speak on multiple levels to multiple people, that's doing also like a wink and a nod to different types of people at different moments. So our advertisers are smart. I think that there's ways to figure it out, but you have to make sure that you also have BIPOC folks that are in the room, right, that are helping to tell the stories, right? That it's not just people who are saying, well, I think that this would be great to have this one person, this one person and this other person in here. Let's have a story that's constructed and makes sense of that in this space.
Or also, I would even say beyond just multiracial people, so-called people of color, I would think it would be important to have, if you really wanted to try to claim you're doing it right, to have people who are engaged in interracial relationships themselves doing this stuff.
Yes.
You get more reality in that as well. Just real quick, I don't see any specific questions. There's a vigorous and even in one case trollful commentary going on. So I'll But if anybody had a question that I didn't see, or they would quickly restate it for us, please do. Or if there's anything that I didn't invite the two of you to say that you want to make sure gets said, please bring that up. Or if you want to reiterate anything, because I'm assuming I can't just have you sit here all day with me and talk about this. So, yeah, I'd
love to be in dialogue. I do need to hop on off, but I just want to, pause in appreciation. I think one of the things is getting a chance to talk to other folks. It's been a gift to hear how this book landed for you, and the places of resonance and dissonance, and that's what we really want to hear about. So deeply.
Well, you're going to hear more before you leave. You're going to hear more, because one thing I did not highlight is that what you do wonderfully in this book is you encourage with questions at the end of each chapter and at the end of the book. My daughters and I, and I'll save this as a teaser for our follow-up, maybe initially privately, but my daughters and I had a vigorous conversation about this yesterday. We went through the questions at the end of the book, and I asked them, and we had a conversation. And so I would love to be in touch to talk more about with it. Yeah. Oh, it was great. It was great. And we talk about this stuff all the time, but going through your specific set of questions it was a different experience. So
it's nice to have a guide. It's nice to have a guide.
It was helpful. And I just sat there, try to keep a straight face. And I only broke character once, and I, because it's a struggle, as you said, when they don't respond the way you want them to.
Gotta sit in that fire.
Yeah.
Just holding on. Anyway, listen, Ralina Joseph, Allison Brisco-Smith, thank you very much. This book is very interesting and exciting. I didn't read every page yet, but I skipped through. It was going back and forth. I'm going to keep going back and forth, going through it. It's fantastic work. Generation Mixed Goes to School, Radically Listening to Multiracial Kids is the title. Doctors Joseph and Brisco-Smith, thank you very much. It's been great. Appreciate you.
Thank you so much for your time.
Having us.
Anytime. Definitely do it again. Take care of yourselves.
Bye-bye. Bye.
All right, everybody. Again, if there are any comments or questions that you want to throw in there real quick, I got a couple minutes here, but otherwise, please make sure you hit the like button, the share button, the join button. Make sure you're back at 5 o'clock Eastern, if you can be, for Lukman Nation, 7 o'clock Eastern for The Last Dope Intellectual, episode 12, and then 9 o'clock Eastern for Renegade Culture right here on the Black Power Media channel. Yeah, Robert Reed, I see you tripping out there a little bit, raising some interesting questions, even in an interesting way. But it's all good. Anyway, whatever. But other than that, yeah, and definitely please be back for the morning show starting next Tuesday morning, where Kim Brown from Burn It Down is going to join us as a co-host, and who knows who else might be popping up here or there on that as well. Yeah, Ricky, if you meant this morning, we missed it too. I was fiending for it this morning. Like I wanted to, anyway. But those who, if you've missed any of the other ones, please go see them. And please do go to blackpowermedia.org and send us your feedback. Let us know what you think of the show or and what I hear you. 3 days a week won't do, Ricky. I appreciate that. And I agree. But some of us, we can't, we can't push everybody. We some of it, we got to be a little patient at least. So, but appreciate that you're interested and the numbers seem to be going well and we want to keep doing them. So, hopefully we'll get to 5 days a week pretty soon. Appreciate that, Sugar Booger. Yeah, the chat was live. Sounds of Elsewhere. How do we make sense of the different terms that have been used to describe mixed race Black people over several decades? Mulatto, Well, for me, at least, a lot of this is just political. And I think a lot of it has to do with managing society and managing whiteness in particular. So, mulatto comes out of the Central and Southern African American experience where, again, the one drop rule changes, when white men almost exclusively go into Central and South America to impregnate through rape and expand the whiteness. And to me, it's all rape, by the way. If the woman can't say no, it's rape. So just in case somebody's confused and think, well, in some cases they may have whatever. If she can't say no, it's rape. So they impose through rape the whiteness to create this mulatticized, and then some of the response was to describe the offspring as some non or subhuman mulatto, and then here it was the terminology and the appended descriptions were to increase the Black or enslaved population, where a white family was intact, came here as an intact family. So all of the rape and violence, sexual violence, was more libidinal, as some put it, than maybe political. The offspring wanted to become property, were needed to become property and part of the non-white. And that's where you get, and then important for me, at least in this discussion today, as they point out, it was in the 80s and 90s where white women who were having children with Black men wanted to extricate themselves and their children from Blackness and from Black communities. They pushed these new multi and biracial and all these other categories, which I think is meant to, in this era, repoliticize potentially Black radical offspring as some other group that is not supposed to be concerned about Blackness and what's happening to Black communities. So that's why in Joseph's work, and somebody mentioned Jared Sexton, in his work, there is this discussion of the hostility, and this is just sort of my own approach to it, that it's not that so-called biracial and multiracial, particularly when we're talking about Black and white, they're not the offsprings of some equal and friendly groupings. They're the offsprings of communities in hostile exchange. So that produces some other effect. Anyway, now to the point when somebody asked about Jared Sexton, I think it's always funny to me that I think it's interesting. Sometimes it's assumed that we could just reach whoever we want. I've reached out to Jared Sexton a number of times over the years. I have interviewed him in the past. You can go to imixwhatilike.org and hear us talk about his work, amalgamation schemes, in an audio podcast some years ago, and interviewed him for another project separately, a writing project, a piece I wrote about being mixed on imixwhatilike.org as well. But from my understanding, the Afro-Latino is helpful and often used by Black populations in Latin America, trying to remind people that Latino is an ethnicity, not a race, and that it's not that they shouldn't have their experiences denied. Yeah, Robert Reed, I just would want to say to you, I think a lot of your reductionism, I don't even know if you're intending to build or intending to just destroy and be hostile in the comments to be disruptive, but your reductionism is overly simple and is outside of the history of this country. So to argue that Black person with a white parent is automatically mixed does a lot of things. It denies what mixture would mean. I would encourage you to actually read this book. I think you would learn a lot about not only the history of this country and racial categorization, but how to radically listen. You're also taking it out of the context of this country's history that I just tried to quickly overly simplify and summarize. But you're also denying the mixture within Black America. You're suggesting that there is this one pure race, and that Blackness is itself not mixed. And you're also doing the work that I would argue was always the beauty of the one drop rule of disaggregating or disunifying Blackness in this country, which needs to be more unified and radicalized on that basis. So now, if you're encouraging, as is the case with many white supremacists, that those of us described as mixed or whatever become a so-called colored community, as is the case in Southern Africa, with the design to be a buffer against the Black Revolution, which is, of course, part of that history as well, then, I guess that's your political choice. But there are those of us who see it very differently and have experienced it very differently. So even some of that reductionism you're raising is disrespectful of the experiences, the lived experiences of many so-called mixed and the Black communities that raise them or engage them. So I don't know. Anyway, I don't know exactly what the goal would be there. But that's interesting. Anyway, listen, I greatly appreciate our guests. I really do appreciate the chat and the comments that is always interesting in our BPM work here. And it's tempting to just want to sit in and to continue to go all day. But unfortunately, other issues call. So listen, everybody, again, 5 o'clock, Lukeman Nation, 7 o'clock, Last Dope Intellectual, 9 o'clock, Renegade Culture. I Mix What I Like Live is coming back next Monday. And in fact, who I'll let you even know now that Monday we're going to be talking with, very interesting. We're going to be talking with writer, do I have the piece right here in front of me? Writer Amandla Thomas Johnson. about a new sort of short book monograph called Becoming Kwame Ture. I'm very excited about that. And then we're also going to be joined, that's at 9 a.m. actually on Monday. At 12 noon, we're going to be joined by Professor Peter Hudson for a discussion of racial capitalism and its origins as a concept in Southern Africa, and so much other things that we could get to with him. So Monday's going to be dope here on I Mix What I Like Live as well. So anyway, a lot of good stuff coming up here on the channel. So make sure you're signed in, you subscribed at blackpowermedia.org. Like, share, subscribe. If you can, join the channel, do all that kind of good stuff as well. Other than that, as always, as Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it, and continue, whether you're still live in the chat or you're going to be here seeing this in the replay, to do like my man Pierre over at Comedy Hype says, and
put it in the comments.
And I'll check you next week, and I'll be in the chat later on watching all the great programming coming up here on Black Power Media. So again, peace if you're willing to fight for it. Take good care, everybody. Catch you next time.